Okay, here's now a short video of trying to reassemble it. I don't know if you can recall what it looked like before, but that's it now. Ready to be assembled. I've got the strike train on this side, time train there, and I'm now going to put the plate on top front and then gradually assemble it. I won't go through the whole lot, it takes too much time, but just to show willing, I'm just going to make a start and then come back to it later. I've cleaned up the plate. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's better than it was. It's quite a good test for patience, this. Right, so that's more or less as it's going to go ahead. Quite exciting. So I'll leave that at the moment, and I'll see if I can come back later on to show you how I've done, what's happening. Wish I'd cleaned it up a bit better now, but it's not bad. Well, I've assembled the parts now. It was quite a long job. It took 45 minutes, but they're running fairly well. You can see that the time train there now runs freely. And this will also run freely. It's a bit more difficult because there are levers and things in the way. But I can't get enough pressure on that. There we are. Putting the pressure on the spring. Trouble is this little warning pins that get in the way and stop the mechanism from running freely, but it's going pretty well. So that's that's done, and I will now inspect these bushes for any looseness in those here and on the other side. And when I've done that, since I've replaced the time spring and the strike spring is okay, I will then reassemble it. Now I've got a real problem here. I put the clock together, and unfortunately what happens is that this little detent here, which should fall down onto the snail here to denote the number of strikes that it should have, is not engaging properly. And that is probably one of the reasons why the clock has fallen into disuse. The edge of this is not big enough to fall on that side there, because this side, or this snail here, it's free to move a little, like that, or like that. And when it moves, this will miss it, and it'll fall in between or jam. So the answer, as far as I can see, is to straighten this out, silver solder, and then file down a nib on that, so that it will fall onto the snail to denote the right number of hours. Not an easy thing to do, because I've got to get it in tune so that it will register the right depth of fall for the rack pin here to fall correctly. That's the American clock, and you can see it's really rather narrow, feeble, and it's not enough to fall on there, and this is free to move. Even when I put the hands on, it still moves a little, and if it moves a little, it can be too much, and then see that has now fallen on the inside, so it's not going to strike, and it'll jam. If you look at the French, which is a pretty grotty clock, but if you look at the French one, A, the snail is much wider, B, the detent that falls on it falls directly onto it, so that this will fall directly onto it when I move that, and so it will register properly. There's no ambiguity, and this can't move. This is firmly fixed because of the way that the French have made it. But this is has too much latitude. You can see that this is a much thinner section there. This is thinner. There's not the meat there. They haven't had the experience in making the American clocks that the French did. And the French have really done it so that it won't fail. This, unfortunately, will fail. You can see that that clay, and even with the hands on it, when I put the hands, that's the minute hand, which will hold it one way around, which will hold it to a certain extent, but even then there's a certain amount of latitude in this. It's too much, so I will see what I can do. And I'll, for the first time, failed. It just formed a little ball there. That looks a bit better. I think they're fused this time. So, fused, I think. We'll soon find out. So what I had to do was to solder with some silver solder and then fashion it out with a file, a little lump on there, so that when that falls onto the snail, it now registers the time as it should do. Now I wonder if I can get that to illustrate. You can see that that fell where it should fall onto the snail, and even if I push the snail forward, I think it'll do it again. No, it didn't, but it will do when I finish messing it around. It fell just inside, and that's a problem. I can bend that out a little. So that was one problem that I've got, but in all probability when the minute hand is on, this will hold it back. As you can see, the minute hand takes up this section here, the square section, so I think that'll be all right. But the worst thing is there's another fault, that when I sorted it out and looked at all the bushings, they were all fine except for this one here with the anchor on it. That is not very good. And this one is an absolute Horlicks here. It's terrible. I don't know if you can see it, but it wobbles around as if it's in a fairground. It's awful. And furthermore, these screws are at the maximum that this will drop down. The maximum, can't drop down any further. And for the anchor to engage the escape wheel here, it has to be at this point here, unless I bend the anchor, and I don't want to do that. And the result of that is that you can see that this arbor here is at an angle. It's up this end. So I think that this is probably an addition later to the clock for one reason or another. And what I've got to do, I think anyway, first of all I've got to bush that again. Secondly, I've got to bush it in a way that it's going to be large enough so I can get this horizontal and not at that angle. And I will also have to bush this. Now, bushing small pieces like that is not easy because you haven't got a plate to work on to hold it steady. You've only got this little bit here and that tiny little thing there. So I've got a problem there. So that was a disappointment, and that's going to set me back quite a long time in work, in doing what I've got to do. But the other thing that I was really disappointed with was that having cleaned the clock off, on my earlier videos I showed the stains on the clock were really quite intolerable and had to have something done to it. So I cleaned the clock off and I've mar-blacked it and I've polished it. But the effect of this is that I didn't do it sufficiently well, and you can see on there the sanding marks all over. So what I've got to do is to take that off and redo it with a very fine sandpaper so that I can get, I'll lose the high polish that I accept, but I've got to get it so that it's going to be uniform all over. But the effect of this with the sanding marks going right through it, which I'm trying to hope that you can see, are really not up to scratch and not what I want to do. So I'll have to start that all over again, strip it all down. So that's going to set me back quite a long time, and it's a grave disappointment, but this is the way it goes. You've got a movement which looks all right, cleans up very well, but had two fundamental things wrong with it. One, the detent that fell onto the snail here wasn't sufficiently robust to be able to guarantee that it was going to fall on the snail. I think it actually will now, and I've soldered on that silver solder. But this, I can't understand why this is at such a dreadful angle. That should be parallel to these, but it's not. And this here, that is, you can see, I hope, how that is moving around. I mean, in such a way that would never work properly. So I can understand why this clock was redundant and stuffed into one side, because with both those faults, no, it wasn't going to work well. And I don't know about the rest. The springs are okay. The bushings in all the rest of them, the pinholes, pivot holes are fine, but there's shortcomings. It's cleaned up very well, and I think it'll work if I resolve it. I've done that. Now I've got to do that, and then I've got to redo the case. Another exciting time. Okay, well, I'll see how that goes. I'll be in touch later. Bye.